evening, because I know you're joining from different parts of the world. So welcome very much to the first in a series of webinars, Introduction to Patient Engagement. Today's webinar is what we would like you to think about: patient engagement as a right for patients as well as a responsibility. So to start off, I am going to take you to a little bit of housekeeping, and would like to remind everyone to please keep their that this session is being recorded, first of all, really important. And we'd like you to be as engaged as you can and as participative. And there will be many opportunities throughout this session for you to chime in and to engage with both the panelists as well as with each other. Your microphones will be muted, and if you want to speak, you'll have to send a message and we'll try our best to accommodate you, but we may not be able to give everyone an opportunity to speak. Similarly, with your questions and comments, they will be responded to at the end, but feel free to continue to text your questions. We'll try and keep a record of as many as we can and try and respond to as many at or during the webinar, but possibly after as well. So let's make this interesting workshop get on its way. Can we go to the next slide? Here we go. Something really interesting about this webinar series is that we're going to be using an artificial intelligence live translation tool called Wordly. So you will, Ellie, would you just tell us how we can get to Wordly on the webinar?
Sure. So everyone should receive kind of a pop-up that you see now that is an invitation to use Wordly. If you just click open and then choose the language that you would like to see the webinar in, the translation services will come in as like it's in the chat. And then all you need to do is you can switch between the chat and the AI translation tool. But everyone should receive now a quick message in their chat that they can open and then choose the language they choose to listen to this in.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So for those for whom English is not the first language and who may not have followed Ellie's message, I'll just repeat the key points on the chat on the right menu. You have a choice of the language, so please click and scroll to your language. It could be Arabic or Bahasa or Mandarin or any other language that you prefer. Once you've done that, you'll be able to listen to the webinar in your language and see the transcription in your language as well. So if you have any questions, just send us a message. We'll try and help you. Thank you. Let's move on to the next slide. So this is the agenda for today. When we were planning this webinar series, our intention was to help us get through and activate patients who are usually not engaged. That is, the patients, family members in the remote parts of the South and Southeast Asian region, as well as any other part of the world, who are largely confined to their homes, disconnected from other patient communities, not really getting access to healthcare or optimal healthcare, and not engaged and taking ownership of their, at least some ownership of their health conditions. So this series is intended to target the beginners, novices, disengaged patients. At the same time, we're hoping that we can get a conversation started. And I know these conversations are already occurring in many parts of the world, and thankfully, increasingly in this part of my world, which is South Asia and Southeast Asia. So we would like to have this conversation, keeping in mind this context of Asia, where we see a predominantly paternalistic health culture, where patients rely on doctors and doctors expect patients to be passive recipients of knowledge, information, care, and the decision-making is largely centered with the healthcare provider who could be your specialist, a clinician, a nurse, and patients are relatively disengaged. Thankfully, we're seeing a culture change, which has happened in many parts of the world, particularly the West. But even in our region, we're seeing a shift to more engagement, more participation and collaboration with patients. So what are the challenges that we face? What are the opportunities we have? What are some of the resources we can access to scale up and skill up? These are some of the topics we will be discussing in this webinar. And we will build up on this discussion today in future webinars, which will be on topics such as evidence-based advocacy, on aspects of health access such as HTA. How do these mediate? How do these facilitate your access to healthcare or to health technology or to, let's say, drugs? These are some of the topics we will be talking about, and our panelists today will not just explain that and discuss this with you, but also help you with resources which will facilitate building a patient engaged, an engaged patient community, as I should say. So I'm going to start with asking our speakers, our panelists today, to introduce themselves. May I ask you, Nikki, to begin?
Hello, everyone. I hope you can see and hear me well.
I can.
Wonderful. Okay. My name is Nikki. I'm a medical doctor, and I'm licensed here in Singapore. I'm from Zimbabwe in Southern Africa, but I've lived in Asia for 16 years. I wear many different hats. I'm an associate visiting expert at the Duke NUS Medical School in Singapore at the Center for Regulatory Excellence. And I'm also working at Takeda Pharmaceuticals International in vaccines. Thank you for joining today's session.
Thank you, Nikki. And I'm very excited not just to hear about your experiences in the region, but also your experiences from living in different parts of the world, the African continent and other parts of Asia. So really excited. Richard, you?
Yeah, good evening or good morning, everyone. My name is Richard Vines. I'm the chair and co-founder of an organization called Rare Cancers Australia, which has been running for 12 years very successfully in Australia. And 6 or 7 years ago, we started to engage through the region with patient groups across the region through something called the Pinnacle program. And I'll talk more about that when it's my turn to talk. But I think I'm delighted. I see there's 50 people on the call, and that's really exciting. And hopefully we can make it worthwhile for you here today. So that's me.
Thank you, Richard. Absolutely. As you said, let's try and make it worthwhile, both for the novice or the beginner patient who we want to engage, but also those of you who are some of you who are champions in their areas. So hopefully there'll be something in it for everyone. Nicola, over to you.
Hi, everybody. Good to be here with all of you and to discuss about patient engagement. So I'm Nicholas Brook. I'm at home. I'm a caregiver. I have a son with cerebral palsy, and actually I've decided to do at work things related to that, and so I have dedicated the last 9 years to patient engagement, the topic of today. And so I'm the executive director of PFMD, Patient Focused Medicine Development, and I will talk about it a bit later. But basically, we try to develop and deploy more patient engagement and support all players, whether we talk about physicians, industry, and patients, to do more of patient engagement and work together.
Thank you, Nicola. Yes, I should have highlighted that both Richard and Nicola are very passionate about the work they do. Not that Nikki isn't, she is as a physician and a huge partner in the process, but both Nicola and Richard have a personal connection just the way I do. And I forgot to introduce myself, so I will go last before I hand over to Nikki. I'm Ritu, and I'm president of DEBRA International as well as DEBRA Singapore. And I'm the mother of a girl with a rare disorder, a dermatological disorder. And I've also, like Nicola, given the past 9 or 10 years of my life to championing the causes of rare diseases and stigmatized communities and overlooked diseases in largely Asia Pacific, but broadly in different capacities all over the world. So I will be moderating this webinar series in conjunction with Nicola and his team. So thank you, all of you. We are at 3:12, and I think it's the perfect time to get started. We're on some of our topics, which is going to be, primarily defining what patient engagement is and how can we get better engaged in order to facilitate access to better health. So defining patient engagement, while we look at some of the possible definitions, like here, I'm not able to move to the next slide. Could I? There. Yeah. So here are some definitions, which is, we were doing some research and coming up with some of the definitions that work for us, which is active participation of patients in their healthcare. And we were thinking that patient engagement is a collaboration where patients are empowered to take an active role in their health, to work in partnership with healthcare providers, or educating and empowering people. So these different facets to us make up or translate to engagement. So it's not just engagement for access to healthcare, but also prevention to a disease, and we are not just talking about rare diseases or chronic diseases, but also common diseases. It could be diabetes, or it could be chronic conditions like eczema, or it could be rare diseases like a rare cancer or a dermatological disorder. So how do we define patient engagement encompasses all these aspects on the screen, but we would love to hear from you in the chat how you understand patient engagement. And could I also ask my panelists, how do they understand patient engagement from their personal experience, but also their experience in championing and doing the work in patient engagement all these years? Richard, you want to give it a go?
Yeah, sure. Look, for me, patient engagement is, I said recently in something that I think that everybody talking to everybody is how you get things working better. And I think the patient voice is just so critical to building better, proper health systems. It assists in patient engagement, will help us work with prioritize what's important, clear out the roadblocks, just because of the way, and I'll talk more about this when I talk, but patients understand health systems from an entirely different perspective to anybody else. And if we don't engage, then and we don't make clear what's needed, then we'll never get the system that we want and we need.
That's right. In fact, what you said makes me think of this, this tale in Asia where you see an elephant, and the blind men who touch the elephant see one part, a leg or a tusk or a trunk or the hide. But the healthcare system is, you remind me that the healthcare system is like the elephant, and a patient just experiences one part of it. So it would be wonderful if these webinars can help us get a bigger picture than what we are seeing today. Nikki, what about you? How do you understand patient engagement? In Asia Pacific, patients are more like participants or recipients of a healthcare, and we think of patient engagement in our spaces of advocacy. We see patients as more like partners. So what's your definition and understanding of patient engagement, if you have a word?
I have a really favorite definition of this that I heard from David Gilbert, who's the author of a book called The Patient Revolution. And when I met him, he told me that patient engagement or community engagement is really sharing the jewels from the caves of suffering. And for me, how I even got into health, how I became a doctor, was from growing up, in the late 80s, 90s, during the height of the HIV epidemic. So I think actually in our regions in Africa and Asia, it was really the ordinary people who were the catalysts, who were the spark for the biggest change. I think if we had waited for governments, if we had waited for doctors, we would never have gotten the medicines for HIV. People were dying every day. It was just, honestly, you always had your bag packed because people were dying that much. And it was ordinary people really making their rights heard and really making the change that made the change. It rippled all the way, you know, from our small towns in South Africa to the FDA in America, that made HIV a treatable condition. So we are the patients, the community are the most powerful voice. So that's for me why they're important.
Wonderful, wonderful reminder, Nikki. Thank you. Indeed, patients are the catalysts of change. As I think of them, Nicola, do you have anything to share? Or
So I'm completely on board with what Richard and Nikki mentioned, and I also see Christian, Tony, and Jesus' contribution in the chat. So completely on board with that. I think it's really important to talk about this collaboration, and actually remind that all the health service providers, and in a very broad sense, are in service of the patient community. And so it's really important that then, of course, it's impossible to say we would not want to serve that patient community. And now actually patient engagement for me is the activity where everybody meets. And so it's indeed the place where patient can make the change happen. That's also the place where all the others, whether it's regulators, researchers, physicians, can actually make better informed decisions because they've actively listened to the patient. So for me, I will develop a little bit later on that, but that will be the starting point. And I really like the definition I have seen in the chat too.
thank you. Indeed, I'm excited to hear how all of this can, especially the webinars we're hosting, can facilitate the activation of all these stakeholders who we know need to be engaged for a better health ecosystem. So let's get started with our first speaker, Nikki, who is going to tell us a little bit about what exactly does this engagement in a specific ecosystem look like. Nikki, over to you.
Thanks, Ritu. I think because, as I said, I've worn many different hats in my life. I'm a carer. I'm a medical doctor who has worked in a hospital. I'm someone who has worked in a ministry of health where decisions are being made about policies, about financing healthcare. And now I have the opportunity to work in a pharmaceutical industry where we're doing clinical trials and we are making medicines for different conditions. And I think for patients, for carers, these are sort of the four groups you really have to engage with, right? Other people who are patients and carers, the government, the hospital who are providing the health services, as well as the people who make the medicines that improve your life. And each of these different groups, I have to say, being in all of them, have a slightly different culture that you need to understand. It's just like when you get to know strangers, you have to sort of understand their perspective. Where are they coming from? What is the context? What is pushing the decisions they make? Sometimes it's easy to just have a surface understanding, say, why do they make decisions like this? You know, why are the doctors making such a decision? Why are the government making such a decision? But I think the more you get to understand the context in which they're working in, the better you can understand the decision to advise how it can be improved, how other people can be involved in making that decision. But all of this, you know, people just have to get to know each other. And sometimes this getting to know each other, you know, to understand our different cultures, our different perspectives, it can happen naturally, it can happen organically. But more often than not, unfortunately, I think we do need some kind of structure, some kind of regular meeting point where over time you get to meet each other again and again. You get to know each other on a human level, understand what are the pressures the other person is facing. what are the contexts the other person is living in. So if you have a structure, some kind of platform, some kind of organized meeting point, this will really help you to understand the other's culture, show other people your own lived experience, and get to know each other where you can develop trust. There's all sorts of stereotypes we can have about each other until we actually just get to know each other. And having structures, platforms, organizations where you can bring everybody together will always help to break down these cultural barriers. So I think the culture and the structure, they go hand in hand. And the last thing I'll say is that a lot of the cultures, and I think patients also do value having some evidence to back up what they're saying. So I think we're not going to go into a very deep discussion about, research kind of data. When I use the word data, I really mean in the simplest sense. Sometimes patients are the only ones that have certain information. For example, if you are having a patient support group or a patient organization, you may be the first people to actually know how many people in your city, in your country, have reached out for support. What is the kind of support they're asking you for? All of this information, the hospital will not have, the government will not have, and this is valuable data. It's not a research study level data, but this is data that can be used for real concrete decisions. So all the information that you have or data that you have as a patient organization, this is very important to add value to other stakeholders in your ecosystem. So continue to learn about the different cultures and subcultures in your ecosystem. Really contextualize whatever you're doing to your country's culture. I mean, our countries are different, just how people engage, really be, adapted to that. I encourage you to form some kind of structure, some kind of platform, and don't minimize the strength of the data. However simple data you have, it's important and it's valuable. I'll hand over to you, Ritu.
Those are great reminders, Nikki. I love it that you talked about culture and structure and data, and all three are such critical components, elements in engaging and continuing the engagement. Perhaps our participants have some questions for Nikki that they can leave on the chat, but I was just thinking, Nikki, while you were speaking, is culture just, as we understand, just between different regions and communities, or can it also be culture between generations, between parents and grandparents and the younger generation? I mean, if I ask my mother to engage in her healthcare, she might find it a bit daunting. She might find it more comforting if the doctor were to tell her what to do. But I would be very uncomfortable with that, where I'm supposed to be the meek recipient of a doctor's decisions. So I think those are things that I would love to pick at the end, as well as, how can we understand, how can we have a better understanding of culture? Especially, I was thinking, we are more engaged online, and it's so difficult, especially in Asia Pacific, to have physical meetings with the patients that we have in mind for these webinars, which are in remote regions, confined to their homes, either by their condition or by their socioeconomic status. How can we break down these cultural barriers? How can we have a better understanding of the cultures? But these are some things that I would love to come back to you for. If our panelists have anything to share about what are other factors that impact patient engagement or improve patient engagement, please chime in.
I think one of the most important aspects is something that we classify as health literacy, so that a patient knows what's going on with their own disease, knows what's going on with inside their treatment, or if they're a carer, then the patient's treatment, and they can understand and then contribute. I think that's really important, and most importantly, participate in that process. I think that's the ultimate patient engagement, is when you don't just blindly accept what a clinician is going to treat you with, but you are engaged enough so that those decisions are shared decisions, and you're an equal participant in the treatment of your disease.
Thanks, Richard. I completely agree with you. And this is where, the title of the webinar today, where I thought that it's not just a right, your access to health is not just a right, but it's also your responsibility. And educating ourselves, getting health literacy is our responsibility for better engagement. So you hit the nail on the head with that thought. And before we go over to you, Richard, I see that Tony has her hand up. I'm going to invite you to speak, Tony, but very, very briefly. Otherwise, we'll save your question for the end. Go ahead.
Happy to save it for the end, no problem. It's not a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Then we'll save your comment for the end, and we will invite Richard with the next slide. Oh, yeah, I would like to invite Richard to talk to us a little more about what you said, as well as some of your experiences, given the tremendous work you've done, Richard, in the region in capacity and capability building. And you've created so many opportunities for patients to advocate better for their health conditions, particularly rare cancers. But recently you branched into, all disorders. So would you like to speak a little bit about the region-specific initiatives you've taken and opportunities that our patients have? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. If we could go to the next slide, that'd be terrific. We'll get started. Thank you. So what I'm really talking about today is trying to give everybody on the call an understanding of why patients and patient groups are critical to building better health systems. And if we can go back one slide, please. And when we talk about resources, and I'll show you the link to this at the end, that we have written, to use an American term, we've written a playbook on how to set up and run a patient group, and things that are important there. And that's been translated, I think the last count, I think it's been translated into 10 languages, and I'll give you the website where you can download it. It's free. But yeah, so let's go to the next slide and have a think about it. So why? It's always that thing when you talk to patients, they're sick, they're being treated, they trust their doctor, they're in a big health system. So why are they important? And why are we important, I guess, for the sake of this call? And the first thing is that nobody knows the impact of a disease better than the patient does. They know what's going on in their own body. They know how a treatment or a medicine, if you take a treatment, you know exactly how it works. One of the examples I always use is, if any of you have been watching the Netflix Drive to Survive, the engineers do all they can to build a race car. The commercial people do all they can. Everybody does all this work, but until they actually get the driver in the car, then nobody really knows how fast it is, how well it'll go around corners, how well it'll maintain itself. And that's like, to me, that's our role as patients and carers. We are the people that experience the health system, be it treatments or hospitals or interactions with doctors. We're the people who know what that looks like. And we should be very strong about understanding that level of expertise. And we also just bring the values of the whole community. Clinicians, and I'm going to get into trouble with Nikki here, but clinicians can be quite isolated in that they go through university and they work in hospitals, but there's a whole different other world out there that patients can bring that life experience and skill. And I think all of that is incredibly valuable. And what's really important to remember too is if you're diagnosed with a rare disease or a cancer, you don't immediately lose your intelligence. You're still a smart person thinking and working about the way things work, and it's very important that that's recognized. And patient groups ought to be around in organizing and empowering patients. That's our job. We're like we're just the organizers, and our role is to amplify patient voice. So next slide, please. this is a quick slide. It's just, again, the example. You know, you can have an engineer to build road systems, you can have architects to design bridges and what have you, but if you want to find out if how well your road system works, it's always a good way to do it is to ask a taxi driver. And the reason that you would do that is that that taxi driver will spend 8 to 10 hours a day on those road systems dealing with the traffic, and they will have a better idea than pretty much anybody else whether your new road is working, whether the traffic lights are working, whether there's all sorts of things that if you ask them what can be, if you get into a taxi and say, what do you think we could do to make the road system better? You won't have to say a word for the rest of the trip. They will just tell you, and it's valuable because they see it every day, and the same is with patients. So, next slide, please. So, what and where can we help with? Well, obviously, as I said before, you know, it's really important, and it's hard. I'm not saying this is just a natural process, but it's your disease, and it's your body, and it's your future. In case of cancer, it's your life. So if you're going to make decisions, if a clinician is going to sit with you and make decisions, they should they should they should take the time to explain what the options are and what the consequences are of treatment, so that you can actually make reasonable decisions, shared decisions. And one of the things we try to do is make sure that people can understand better what's going on. I think research is a really huge area, and I know this is a passion of Nicholas's, but you know, it's really, if someone's going to set up and run a clinical trial to test a new therapy, it's really important that that's done with respect to the patients that are going to participate in it. And that won't happen if patients don't raise their voice. Sometimes Australia, where I'm from, is a huge country, and sometimes we're trying to, we're trying to deal with, we'll put a particular specialty in one city in the corner of Australia, and some people will have to fly for 5 hours before they can get treated, and we need to make that fairer for people in regional Australia. And I know that same problem impacts so many countries in the region. And when we're talking, one of the things I won't talk about today, but it's really important, is when we're talking to government about investing in health, it's important to understand that it's competitive. No matter how you look at this, if you walk in there and say, I would like these new medicines or this new hospital or more doctors or what have you, you're competing with the general from the military who walks in and says, I want 100 new tanks, or the guy from the Air Force who wants 20 new planes, or the university that wants a new building, or somebody else who wants a new road. So we have to think about the value that we bring. And some of that is not just clinical, it's what healthy population means to society, how good certain drugs can be, or certain therapies or certain treatments can be for the economy, and the psychosocial damage. You know, there is nothing more disruptive to family life than a sick child, for example. So we need to be out there and telling people about that. And the last thing I'll say about that is the diagram on the right. Really, I get very annoyed when people talk about health as though it's one step after another in a logical, organized way. It's not. It's a mess. We all, patients who are living with any disease, we have good days, we have bad days, we have to have scans, we have different treatments, we become, the treatment stops working, we get another one. It's kind of all over the shop, and explaining that to people is a really important part. So next slide, please. I'm not sure if I should have timed this. And that's just the other really important point of everything that we do, is that if you want change and you want to make a better and improved health system, everybody has to work together. When you put it all together, it fits. If I've had situations where we've had all of those people working together, and then I've been able to go to our health minister and say, hey, we all think this is a good idea. And he's gone, oh, well, if you all think it, I'm not going to say it's not, and it's a reasonable price, etc., etc. So working together, reaching out, talking to people is important. Next slide, please. I always like to show this slide, because I think that sometimes the people in this slide, the people in the boat sometimes are the pharmaceutical industry and government. And sometimes they're sitting in the boat having an argument about what a medicine, what a life jacket should cost, or a medicine should cost, when what they should be doing is throwing the life jacket in to save the patient and working all the rest of it out later. So I think I just like to remind people that I particularly like to remind government and industry that the job is not to have an argument about the price. The job is to get the life jacket to the patient. Next slide, please. This is a complicated slide, and I apologize, but it's what we've been able to do in our work last year in Asia Pac was we built a framework where, if we want to get change, there are 5 pillars that you need to address. And I won't labor the point. I'm going to show you the link later on to where you can download the report, and it's all in there and explained in that. But it's really, what I would say is when we're going to start talking about health systems and how to make them better, it's really important that you understand that it's multiple parts. It's not just telling a story about a patient who couldn't get a medicine, but you need evidence, you need solutions, you need lots of voices. There's a whole way to do this, and I think and having a structure to it. So it's governments, policymakers they'll be terribly sympathetic about a sad patient story, but you've also got to give them some solutions and some evidence that what you're proposing will do better. Next slide, please. As I said, we wrote a report called the Pathways for Transforming the Cancer Ecosystem, a patient-centered framework. It's largely about it's sort of a snapshot of what's going on in the region. It does have a cancer focus, and I apologize that is not necessarily where all of you are, but it is a good reference manual to read and to understand things like the framework and how that might help, as is the playbook. And if you're interested, you can go to pinnacle-patient.com, or if you want more information, you can email lydia@rarecancers.org.au, and we'll reach out to you. We run a lot of workshops in the region, in addition to these that are in-person workshops. And if people are interested, you're very welcome to reach out to Lydia and say, put me on the list when you're next traveling through wherever. We don't run workshops just for cancer. We run workshops for patient organizations. So yeah, thank you for inviting me, Ritu. It's fantastic to see the people on the call, and I hope this is the beginning of something really special. So next slide, please. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to take questions now or later, so you can ignore me if that's...
Maybe. Yeah, later maybe. Yeah. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
That was good. Okay. Really, thank you. Really powerful, really powerful. I love, personally, I'm reading all the comments, and so many people are loving your analogies, but I love the taxi drivers. Indeed, patients are the taxi drivers who know the health landscape best. They know the speed bumps, they know the potholes, they know the smooth areas. And I love that analogy, and I hope that we can help to map some of that landscape with these webinars and guide patients over the humps, at least through partnerships through these webinars. And I also, really like that you mentioned that healthcare is not just about saving lives, but also about, there was a comment in the chat that we focus too much on saving lives, but not on improving quality of life. So definitely it's patients who decide and who should decide what's more important to them, improving their quality of life. As some of our patients with EB say, I don't want you to work on a cure, which may happen in a decade or two, or never. I want you to give me a cure for that itch that doesn't allow me to sleep every day. It doesn't allow me to live an optimal life. So let's talk about some of these topics and more with Nicola. I'm going to take a decision to take the questions and comments at the end, because we are running slightly short of time. So Nicola, I'd like to invite you to share with us about how can we get our caregivers, our family members and patients to engage? How can they become part of the community, and how can they become more effective stakeholders and co-create outcomes that they want to see? Over to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Ritu. So I'll develop on the community aspect, because yes, you are a lonely patient or caregiver if you are alone, but actually there's a whole community out there. And so that's what I want to develop a little bit on. So the very first thing we ask about, and Richard mentioned, it's a competitive environment. You cannot just come here and ask for something. You need to work together and bring evidence. If I can go to the next slide. The environment around you. So when you can go to the next slide. I will next slide. The environment around you is about is changing its perspective. So it's not going so fast, but actually the fact that now we are listening to the patient community is quite new. And so there is a shift that before it was a risk, a liability to engage with patients. And now in terms of the decision makers, the idea that actually we cannot continue to say that and we have to listen to patients, it's evolving quite fast. And if you can go to the next slide. So here you see, and I will not go into details here, but you can see that in the last 30 years, a few things happen in favor of patient engagement. So that's the development of a new entity like Hoeopathy, for example, which is a training academy for the patients to get the level of expertise so they can actively contribute in the health systems. We have a few things like that. But then in the last couple of years, there is a huge acceleration of regulators, of HTAs, or payers, so the people that are either approving the medicine or reimbursing the medicine, are actually taking decision to say, okay, now we need to listen to the patient. So I've seen in the list of participants that Fiona Pierce is there. She's doing great work in Singapore from the payer point of view. So I hope we will have an opportunity to give her the word there. But so it's really moving in favor of doing more patient engagement. Now, that doesn't mean that if you are going now in the systems, you are just welcome and people are ready to engage with you, because we have a lot of work to do to make that happen. Now, when you will engage in the system, you will meet with people that are super busy. There are plenty of work to do, and they have never really factored in how to work with the patient community. And so if you can go to the next slide. One of the key barriers, Ritu was asking earlier, what was the barrier, is that working with patients is a time consuming, it's perceived as time consuming, it's perceived as an extra cost. And actually, when you face people, entities, you can actually start to demonstrate that patient engagement is saving time and saving money for all the different stakeholders. And so here it's for the development of a medicine. We can see that when you develop your product, you will recruit patients in clinical trial faster. So you will actually get save time in terms of writing the protocol of your clinical trial, which is something that takes a lot of time. You will save a lot of costs because of this time of recruitment and protocol amendment savings. You also, because you have worked with patients, you have a medicine that is a better fit for purpose and better differentiates to not only treat the clinical aspect, but also consider quality of life. At the end of the day, you increase your chance to be approved by the regulator by 20%. That's the data we have at hand. When you're a pharma company, so the net present value, the last number there that you see is like each company, when they're developing new medicines, they actually have a way to calculate what's the potential revenue in the long term and what are the costs that we will need to get there. And so they call that the net present value, but working with patients actually increase the net present value of the portfolio of molecules they have in the pipeline. So it's really in all aspects. It's a cost saving, a time saving activity to work with patients. All of that, not only for better health outcome for the patients. I think it was Tony putting that in the chat earlier, but also for the systems. If research altogether is less expensive, better targeted, we can actually have a more efficient research process. We can have a more efficient hospital network. We can have a more efficient reimbursement system. So really, the patient community, getting closer to the patient community and understand the taxi driver view is actually helping all health systems to be more efficient. So when you meet people that start from the assumption that they don't know where to make it happen, they don't have time and it costs money, actually you can challenge them on that front. Moving to next slide, please. Now, next slide again, moving to capabilities and resources. So basically, as Richard has presented some tools, we also have developed some tools with PFMD. And so we have what we call the PEM suite, the Patient Engagement Management Suite. It's a whole toolbox with a very high level tool, like just 7 dimensions to respect when you work with patients, to more specific tools, like how to design a clinical trial when you work with patients, or simply like when you work with pharma companies, what will be a template contract that you can use that saves you a lot of time, because if you have not done it yet, you will see that it's always a huge piece of the relationship is to land a contract, which is not too complicated and reflect the actual relationship between the patient community and the industry. So we have tools also, we have trainings, online trainings to explain what it is. It's for you, but it's also for the people you will meet in the future. You can share the link and say, okay, this is what I expect from our relationship moving forward. It's there's a light version, which is only 10 minutes to set the scene about patient engagement. And so we have a whole series of tools that goes also into sometimes, especially when it comes to drug development, very, very specific activities. And that's what you can find on the web address that you see in the title there, and you can use a QR code as well. And I see Aurora put it in the chat as well. So that's a whole tool. There's a whole toolbox. We continue to work on it. We put tools from other entities as well. So it's a place where you can find a lot of resource and play with, depending on what you want to achieve. Can go to the next slide. Now, I started by saying it's a community, and actually we will not have impact if we work as many individuals. So we have the patient organizations. Nikki was mentioning also, like, how can you work at the local level to gather like the data? And so yes, and let's also remind that patients already don't want to be patient initially. So we should not expect every single patient to become super active. Like, we have to respect people's choice. Some people want to engage, but not everybody has to engage. And so for the one that want to engage, there is a whole patient engagement community out there. And that's what I want to do, because there are plenty of people there to help. If you start and you really start from scratch, really the very first step is to see who is active on your disease in your region, and try to see how you can join them as a first step. And then how we can develop like bigger and bigger network. And again, not only networks between patients, but the patient engagement committee are people like, we have physicians, we have pharma companies, or people in pharma companies, we have people from the regulators, we have people from the payers. They are also in their group, in their environment, trying to change the thing. And so working together really help us coming with a common and coherent proposal to the rest of the health system. So next slide, please. Now, one thing I wanted to mention, there is here today, you are in DEBRA and patient engagement open forum session. So it's really the place to do that, to bring different stakeholders together and to discuss about patient engagement. And we have virtual and in-person meetings all along the year that you can join and find on our website. You also have the online network. So we are in a digital age. So how can we connect this community and empower this community in a digital age? So you can go to the next slide. We have this online network, and you can see it's just one of the tool, but to visualize that, help you visualize that that's the network of initiatives, people, organization, events, resources about patient engagement. So you can see, you can go, you can zoom on that map, see what's happening in your country, see what's happening for your conditions or the conditions you want to be active in. There is already a whole network of people, and you can click on the next slide. And it's not only the people in the organization, it's like, what are the resource linked to these organizations. So you can see that's another way to navigate the tool. You can see here that's a patient engagement open forum map. So all the people that have joined sessions, that have shared resources, their presentation, all the content around them, the organization, what the organization is doing, and you can navigate the map. And so basically we are trying to empower the community and to actually not, before we empower it, just to connect it. And so it's really important to work together and to actually formalize how we are a group, because this community altogether, it's a lot of champions or people championing patient engagement and the role of patients. And we can, each time you have a good idea, you can share it with a community that is really at hand there. And so we can go on the next slide. That's, I was mentioning we are virtual and in-person meetings. Next week, we'll be in Italy for nearly 1 week and 200 people from across the globe to actually discuss. And so we have some very specific, like how can AI empower the patient community as opposed to dismiss the patient community as some researchers would like to do sometimes. Just plenty of very specific topics like that we discuss face-to-face in this case, but there will be the online follow-up each time. And we will put some tools out there to help everybody to work on that. And I'm very conscious of time, Ritu, so I will stop here.
Thank you, Nicola. Really like that. Great overview of acceleration of engagement across the world, particularly the work you're doing outside, globally, actually, you're working on a global level. And I love it that you were able to introduce these tools that help different stakeholders, not just patients, but different stakeholders to get better engaged and accelerate and expand their impact. I like the templates that can be borrowed, not just yours, but also what Richard shared with Pinnacle, which may be specific to certain diseases, but can serve as templates for various conditions and for various communities. So these are really valuable. I love that. Thank you. I also want to tap on, given the focus of these webinars for our lesser developed regions or developing regions of Asia, in the Asian context, I want to tap on some of the audience members and ask some of our audience to illustrate resources in the region or experiences in the region. And I know that Fiona is here. Fiona, can I? Oh, there she is. Hi, Fiona. I was wondering if you would be able to share a little bit of the work that we are doing in Singapore. And these are, I think, valuable resources because we have started with such, very basic patient engagement strategies, such as the shared decision-making that the shared decision-making that the resources that we are currently working on, as well as the resources that are on the consumer engagement and education side. So would you be able to tell us a little bit about that in Singapore, Fiona?
Sure, Ritu. So my name is Fiona Pearce. So I work for the Agency for Care Effectiveness, which is Singapore's health technology assessment agency. We're a relatively new agency established about 8.5 years ago. And when we were first developing our processes, we were told to really focus on just working with clinicians. So seeking expert input only from clinicians, because it was felt that they were best placed to speak on behalf of patients, what they wanted. And so that was our directive, and our processes were set up in that way. We didn't necessarily agree with it at the time, but we've found now that clinicians are familiar with what we are doing, we were allowed about 3 years ago to start bringing the patient voice into our health technology assessment process. So within ACE, I set up what's called CEE, the Consumer Engagement and Education Workstream. We're a small team. But we're a dedicated staff headcount of about 4.5 people, to identify patient organisations and patients and carers in Singapore who would like to contribute to ACE's work. So the health technology assessments, but also, as Ritu mentioned as well, co-develop educational resources to help improve health literacy for patients, carers and the public in Singapore about different healthcare conditions and about navigating the healthcare system and being active participants as part of their healthcare journey. So as part of that, we established what's known as the Consumer Panel, and Ritu is one of our members, and I can see some of our other members online here today as well, which is wonderful. And they are typically people who have a lot of experience with the Singapore healthcare system. So they represent the collective voice of patients and carers, and they help provide strategic direction to ACE on how the patients can be meaningfully engaged to contribute to ACE's work. As well as that, for each technology assessment that is done, we work with individual patient organisations who have members who are likely to have an interest in that health technology that's being assessed. So they might have the condition, or they might be carers of people who do have that condition, or they might be familiar with the treatment that's under evaluation. So we have many different ways of working with the patients. It is very resource intensive. We're lucky Singapore is a pretty small country, but overall we spend a lot of time identifying patients and also identifying their needs to see whether they'd like to be involved. And this comes back to what Nicholas said before as well, that really resonated with me. When we were first identifying all the patient organisations, a lot of them said that they weren't really resourced to contribute to ACE's work, or their members weren't really that interested in being involved in ACE's work. So we spent a lot of time trying to work out whether we could provide resources that would help them, or whether they were just going to be a group that we would keep them informed of what we were doing, but knew that they didn't want to be actively involved in that piece of work specifically. So understanding those barriers and also respecting the boundaries there as well. All of our materials that are co-developed with patients are put on our website, so it's all publicly available on the ACE website for anyone to download as well. We produce plain English summaries as well of a lot of the technical documents that our other work streams do, so that patients can understand the decisions that have been made about treatments and about their condition and how it might be relevant to them as well. Ritu also mentioned, just to finish, the work that she was doing on co-developing evidence-based medicine and best practice sharing with patients, so kind of a toolkit. And this is something that the ACE Consumer Panel has asked us to help them with. So really not worrying about the health technology assessment process, but focusing on the decisions that patients need to make with their doctors. So developing a shared decision-making toolkit that will equip them with the information that they need to be able to ask the right questions about their treatment options and make sure that their preferences and needs are met by the patient. I'll just stop there, Isha. I think that's enough.
Thank you, Fiona. That's absolutely lovely. I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to share the link to some of the resources that are on the CEE website, which are, you know, for each, I mean, you have not only do we have the plain language summaries, but we have these educational resources, which are super valuable and easy to understand. So directing our audience to these resources. It's thanks so much for sharing, Fiona. It's so heartening that agencies that are working on health technology are actually working with patients to facilitate access to drugs. So patients, I know because I nominate topics, and we can actually request for certain drugs and devices to be made accessible and available on the subsidized healthcare schemes in Singapore. So this is a huge step forward of collaboration. And similarly in Singapore, I know Eiling is here. Eiling, who works for the Lee Kong Chian School of Medicine in Singapore. She's working with researchers to facilitate patient engagement in research through her newly established Office of Patient Engagement. So these are great initiatives that are happening in the region, and they give me so much hope for a shift in the culture from being paternalistic and top-down to being more collaborative and partnering. But at the same time, I'm a little bit aware that how do we get started? You know, we have all these resources that Nicola, Richard, you shared, and Nikki, as a physician, you've given your perspective. Fiona, you've shared what you do, but you are actually very much the stakeholders at the top, or very champions of patients. I'm wondering if there's someone here, like I see that LL is here, a friend and a colleague in the patient advocacy space. LL, do we have you still? Can I? Ah, there he is.
Yes, you do.
Hi. LL, I was wondering if you could share what about patients who are wanting to start who simply want to go from being, the patient confined in their home to the patient who wants to get started. What can patients who are totally new to patient engagement, how can they take the first step? How can they identify and obtain some support? What should we start? Tips.
Daddy, I'm leaving.
Right. So I thought the presentations by Nikki, Richard, and Nicola were really good. And something that particularly resonates with me is what Nicholas has shared about. We do have already got a lot of patient champions, who champion their cause, and they really take it upon themselves to go and look out for resources. And I think we do not have a problem with such patient champions because they know how to navigate the system. They are eager for knowledge. They want to connect people. They want to do stuff for their patient organization, so they go and seek the resources out themselves. But I think the other statement that Nicholas made in his presentation was, we cannot take the risk of not engaging patients, right? So what if we do not have any patient champion emerging from the population, for example, or from the ecosystem? So I think this is where patients have to be nudged, because on their own they may be lost. They may want to engage, but they don't have it in them to initiate something themselves. And here, I think what can happen is at the various touch points with their clinicians, who can just give the gentle nudge, why don't you do this, right? And then point the way to the resources that are available. All right, there are a lot of resources that are available, as all our speakers have shared. And sometimes they need this initial nudge, the encouragement to start something. And I'm sure today at touch points, clinicians, doctors, or nurses can identify patients who potentially can do this. And I also think that if you really want to have effective patient engagement in places where it is absent, then the support from the clinician is very important. You cannot just tell the encourage the patient, look, I think you need to, organize something, get more patients involved in this. You want to hear your patient voice, and then leave them without the support or the resources they can fall back on. So I think this clinician-patient partnership is so important, to get things started until that particular group is more mature. They are provided with training and they become more confident in their dealings. And then they can share all the resources that are available, already available in the ecosystem. But until then, I think they need to be supported. And the best way to do this is to during these engagements with the clinicians and during either their treatment or their checkup, for clinicians to identify, may not be clinicians, maybe allied health professional, anyone, right? To give the initial push and say, look, why don't you do this? I'll help you along with, getting started, and I'll point you to the resources. And I think this partnership is very important, especially if the patient champions are not forthcoming on their own. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does, Ellen. Thank you so much for that. I think that's a really good reminder that all you need is one supportive partner to get started. It could be your healthcare professional. It could be the nurse you see. It could be maybe your local elected representative. It could be someone like, in the healthcare technology assessment arm like Fiona is, or it could be another patient or a patient champion. And that patient champion doesn't have to be from your disease area. It could be just any patient champion, creating patient alliances, either disease-specific or broad alliances. Any measure would add value to engagement. So thanks so much. I think I'm going to address some of the questions that are popping in, some directly to me and some on the chat. One question we have is for Nikki. I think pardon me if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Jesus. The question is how to create effective structures but allow transitioning into real projects. I've seen often in the pharma industry, initiatives remain theoretical, but don't translate to action. What's your experience? I guess, Nikki, you wearing your pharma hat, your response. Do we have Nikki?
Yeah. Yes. I think that although the farmer can be involved, the beating heart of any platform must be people whose interest is very permanent, is uninfluenced by election cycles, financial year cycles. I think most pharmaceutical companies do have a long-term view to strengthen the patient voice, not just for our top line benefits, like what Nicholas was saying. It helps us in our trials. It helps us in getting the regulatory approval sooner. But I think most of the people who go to work in pharmaceutical companies, they actually joined it to make a difference, right? To find those cures for diseases that don't have cures. This is the whole reason they went into that sector. So they're definitely a partner for you. But I think the heart and the foundation must really be the patients themselves, and along with clinicians, people whose interest is going to be 100% every day of the week, every day of the year, no matter the economic situation. That's really what you need to drive, and really let in wherever the common interest is there. Be open to let other people under the umbrella. Ask them, be a long-term partner. We prefer you to really, challenge them that don't be a 1 year in, 1 year out partner. We really want partners, good quality partners who are there for the long haul. And I think they are there in the pharmaceutical industry. They are there among the physicians and even among the politicians as well. But you really have to find those few good examples.
Thank you, Nikki. Agree with you. We are really like just 20 minutes left. So I'm going to, Tony had raised her hand earlier. So I'm going to invite her for a brief comment, or was it a question? And then we've got one more segment of this webinar left. So we will continue after that. Tony?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I think, it was very much from the beginning of the session, but I suppose I just wanted to add to the topic at the time of medical literacy. I found that the more understanding patients are of their situation and their level of education themselves within their home setting plays a big role in their engagement. And then, I've also found I work locally with our South African patient organization, but I've also got a bit of experience working internationally as well. And in developing regions, specifically, I think also what affects patient engagement is cultural beliefs, which has been mentioned. But I've recently found last year that I think beauty standards in different countries also pay a bit of hold some weight in terms of whether patients are keen to get loud and proud and engage and accept their diagnoses and then go out into the world with those. Places like China come to mind, places like Central Africa come to mind, where we as leaders have to be flexible enough to be able to provide support to patients that are in first world countries where beauty standards, you've got all different types of people running catwalk models and things like that. And then, in Central Africa, we're still having people killed for being born with vitiligo. So definitely your area, I think, also plays quite a large role in patient engagement. That's just what I wanted to add.
Thank you, Tony. That is such a wonderful reminder. Yes, healthcare is not just about, throwing that life jacket, as Richard showed us, once they decide on the design and cost of the life jacket, but also about improving the ecosystem for a better quality of life, as one of the participants mentioned in the chat. What about quality of life and mental health? So these are really important aspects. So that's a valuable reminder. But I'm going to actually, for the next 10 minutes, I hope we can do a little bit of an exercise to capture your ideas and questions, especially those of you who are not comfortable in English, or you're not comfortable speaking. So we have an opportunity for you to populate, to offer some of your ideas and questions via the group map. So Ellie, if you could take it on from here, tell us about the group map and how it works, please.
Sure. Thanks so much, Ritu. Hi, everyone. So we are doing just a little bit of an engagement piece. We can continue to take questions and answers and speak to the panelists and share as we go through this together. But Aurora here in the chat just shared a link. So if you click on this link, we're using a tool that helps us capture ideas, questions, and future topics. So Aurora, if you can switch over now to the actual group map. Perfect. And I see people joining already. You can click on this link and come here. It's a little bit of an engagement exercise. We thought that it would be nice to hear from you about the challenges you face, maybe some of the resources or success stories that you've had or collaborations you've had, and then any future topics that you would like to see covered as part of this PE 101 series. You can go in this link, just click the box here, as you've seen, type something out and press enter. If you don't have an email account, if you do not have access to a computer, feel free to include these things in the chat. We will be populating the group map later with all of the ideas that you share in the chat. So if there are challenges you've had that you would like to be discussed, or even future topics, feel free to add those in the chat, and we will also add them to the group map you have here. I've heard health literacy come up a lot in the chat and over our conversations today. That would be an example of something that you could pop in the future topics. If there's a specific element of health literacy that you'd like to see covered through this PE 101 series. And I'm starting to see ideas pop in already. So feel free to continue to add. You can even give a little thumbs up here to the ones that you feel really strongly about, and actually they will be prioritized by the thumbs up.
Thanks, Ellie. While people writing or communicating, I have a question from Eileen. I'm not sure if Sheetal has seen that. Dr. Sheetal Raval Patel. Eileen says, I'd like to find out more about this training program you've developed and if this is available on your website. So please feel free to respond on the chat and share all the resources you would like from your communities to be shared. And we're also happy to try, perhaps we can set up a platform where we can share resources through after this webinar. We'll be in touch with you about that.
I think we can see already, Ritu, there's more challenges than there are success stories.
Yeah. Okay, health literacy resources. I'm also wondering, would this health literacy be disease specific, more broadly, or systemic? How does one get access? I'm happy that some of this webinar series is actually targeted to give you more information about the different aspects of a healthcare system, like what happens when a gene therapy is approved. Do you get that in your country? What is the process from approval to access? So they are, and these are some of the topics we'll try to cover, but feel free to also share with us what kind of health literacy you would like, if you know. Ellie, any thoughts? Or also, I'd like to invite our panelists. If you have any thoughts, please feel free to chime in. I see a challenge about speaking about language. Yes, I completely agree. The diversity of our region and across the world, especially the global south, makes this an additional challenge. And hopefully AI will help us navigate some of those challenges through translations. Yeah. We see a lot of health literacy popping up.
It's interesting to see some of the challenges. Number one challenge voted is definitely health literacy. The second one is around patient education on regulatory pathways of drug development. And then we also have understanding the concerns and priorities really from the patient perspectives.
And I'm really excited that even ACE in Singapore, the Agency for Care Effectiveness that Fiona's just shared more about, is developing a module on HTA. And I'm very excited and look forward to that, which will be shared on the ACE website, the one that I just shared with you. And I'm happy to let you all know when that becomes available. It's a learning module. Let me share the link of that. Anyone else who has a burning question, comment, who'd like to speak? This is a conversation, so please don't hesitate. If you have something that you'd like to say, just keep it brief.
Maybe I just wanted to come back to a question in the beginning about where to start. And so for me, what we are missing very often is like when we talk about patients, there are many different types of patients, and the level of health literacy is something that you don't acquire in one day. And so I just remember there was a comment, sneaky probably, saying that someone said my mother would never challenge a physician. And I have to say that until I became a father, I would have never challenged a physician. Not only my mother or my father, but me either. I was in this mindset. And so for me, the very easy way to start is simply to ask for a second opinion. Because the moment you start to do that, it's not you that start to be in confrontation with one physician because something doesn't sound right. You just ask for a second opinion, and suddenly two physicians say two different things, and then you make them discuss together. And then for me, that was a very first step to actually start engaging as a participant and not only as a recipient in the discussion. And I think when we talk to patients or caregivers, that's probably the very first advice to start from. Ask for a second opinion, because then you start to say, okay, first of all, they don't say all the same thing. So what can I do in that discussion, and so on and so on. So I just wanted to come back on that. It's for me, like I know that in this call, many people have passed that stage, but I think we don't remind enough to the people at the very beginning of the learning curve that might be a starting point.
That's a brilliant reminder, Nicola. I couldn't agree more. I would not have dared to challenge a doctor because we just look at them as repositories of knowledge and care providers, and we respect them, and we should. But yes, we should also have the confidence, especially for undiagnosed diseases or for rare diseases where the doctors may not even know about this disorder, may have never met a patient with this disorder. You as the patient with the lived experience should have the confidence and the courage to speak up for yourself. But I love Nicholas's solution. You don't go, as Ellen reminded me recently, you don't go banging on the table and get into a confrontation with the healthcare provider, especially when you're scared and frustrated and unhappy. But you try and find a second opinion, which supports you that something is not quite right. So that's a great starting point, Nicola. Any other thoughts from our participants? Do we have any more questions or comments? Anyone else who has a comment? Nikki, you want to say that for people who...
Sure,
maybe
yeah, I think we always talk about the doctors, but there's so many different professionals in the health system who you can, bring in to be champions for patient engagement as well. So don't forget about our nurses, our patient services associates, pharmacists. There's so many people working in healthcare, people on the back end, people on the front end, and they all play their part and really can be champions in the broader community.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? I am... Okay. Ellie, you want to...
Just want to say thank you to everyone who's putting information in the group map. We know that English is not everyone's first language, so we appreciate everyone taking the time and effort to do that and to put ideas, challenges, resources here. We have plenty of content, I think, for future sessions. So thank you all so much for your engagement. Ritu, if you want to close us out.
No, absolutely. I have another participant who's sharing a little bit about patient engage, and I think that link will come up in the chat. But I want to thank all of you for joining us from different parts of the world. Especially thanks to my DEBRA colleagues who at different hours, I can see Raina from Austria, I can see Zlatko from Australia, and there is Saida from Malaysia, Tony from South Africa, but not just you guys, but all of you, from different parts of the world who've joined us and contributed to this very rich discussion. Thanks, sincere thanks, and also thank you to Ellie and team for facilitating this. We look forward to a webinar series, hopefully in the next 2 months or 3 at the most, on the next topic, and we promise to send the information to you much in advance. So please feel free to share onwards and engage with, whatever kind of stakeholder you are. You may not be a patient. I know some of you are clinicians and researchers and even pharma industry. So please feel free to share with your contacts, and let's spark the change that we want to see, particularly in the Global South. Let's make patient engagement as real as possible for people who deserve a better quality of life and better access to healthcare. So thank you for joining, for contributing, and keep this discussion going. Keep engaging with us. Thank you. Stay back.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Nicola. Richard had to jump off, so thank you from him. I see Ruthie here as well. I did not see her earlier. Ruthie, hi, from Sweden, another colleague from in the DEBRA space, in the EB space. Eiling, thank you for joining. Thank you so much, Fiona. Hello. Alexander, thank you.
Yeah, I didn't speak that much, but okay, I'm a new in the patient advocacy world.
Well, you are the person who's who this webinar is for. So thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Absolutely, and keep coming back. Thank you, Asim,
Yeah.
Paula, Jesus, and Sebastian also. Thank you, Sebastian, for joining. Wonderful. Thibaut is here from Australia, a huge champion of people with EB and other rare skin diseases. Thibaut has done so much work for people, even though he spends his time in front of a computer making magic for films. So Thibaut, thank you. One would be lovely to see your face, but if you're shy, thank you, Sohi. There is Thibaut. Hey Thibaut, so lovely to see you.
I'm actually working, so I'm putting this on the corner.
Of course, I know, but thank you for joining even during your working day. Really appreciate that. And I see Edda's here. Is that Sandra?
It's Sandra, yeah, sorry.
Sandra, hi.
Hi, you too.
Wonderful.
As a
And
question.
our lovely Megan's here from DEBRA International. Thank you, Pamela. Asim, I'm not sure where you're from. Zaid. And Janelle, thank you. And Kazuyoshi, thank you for joining. Please keep the conversation going. Thank you for joining us.